August 4th, 1962. The sun was setting over Beverly Hills as Hollywood's elite gathered for what would become one of the most significant private parties of the 1960s. The host was producer Arthur Krim, and among the guests were some of the biggest names in entertainment, politics, and business. But for Alain Delon, who was in Los Angeles promoting his latest film, the evening would become a memory that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Alain had been in Hollywood for 3 weeks, navigating the complex world of American filmmaking and trying to establish himself as an international star. At 26, he was already a sensation in Europe, but conquering Hollywood required different skills and different connections. That evening, he was dressed impeccably in a tailored black suit, his naturally charismatic presence drawing attention from across the room. But when Marilyn Monroe walked into Arthur Krim's Beverly Hills mansion at approximately 8:30 p.m., everyone else seemed to disappear. At 36, Marilyn was at a crossroads in both her career and personal life. Her marriage to Arthur Miller had ended 2 years earlier. Her affair with President Kennedy was becoming increasingly dangerous, and her struggles with prescription drugs and alcohol were beginning to take a visible toll. But that evening, she was luminous in a simple white dress that seemed to glow against her platinum blonde hair. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, Alain later confided to a close friend. But there was something in her eyes that broke my heart. Even in a room full of people who adored her, she looked desperately alone. They were introduced by mutual friend and fellow actor Yves Montand, who had worked with Marilyn on Let's Make Love 2 years earlier. The chemistry between Alain and Marilyn was immediate and electric. Despite their different backgrounds and languages, they found themselves drawn to each other with an intensity that surprised them both. "You're not like the others," Marilyn told him as they found a quiet corner of the garden where they could talk away from the crowd. "Most men look at me like I'm a fantasy. You look at me like I'm a person." For the next 3 hours, they talked about everything and nothing. Marilyn was fascinated by Alain's stories of European cinema and his unconventional path to stardom. Alain was captivated by Marilyn's intelligence and vulnerability, qualities that were hidden beneath the carefully constructed public persona that had made her famous. As the evening progressed, other guests began to leave, but Alain and Marilyn remained in the garden, lost in conversation that felt both intimate and urgent. There was an unspoken understanding between them that this meeting was significant, though neither could have predicted how tragically brief their connection would be. Around midnight, Marilyn began to open up about the pressures she was facing. She spoke about her complicated relationships with powerful men, her struggles with studio executives who saw her only as a commodity, and her growing fear that she had become trapped in a life that no longer felt like her own. "Everyone wants something from me," she confided. "My body, my image, my silence about things I've seen and heard. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning and everyone around me is just watching the show." Alain found himself drawn into her world of glamour and pain, beauty and loneliness. Despite having known her for only a few hours, he felt a protective instinct toward this vulnerable woman, who was simultaneously the most desired and most isolated person in Hollywood. As they talked, Marilyn revealed details about her life that would shock anyone who heard them. She spoke about her relationship with President Kennedy, describing it not as the romantic affair that history would remember, but as something far more complicated and dangerous. "Jack isn't just the president," she whispered, glancing around nervously, even though they were alone. "He's surrounded by people who would do anything to protect his image. And Bobby scares me. He thinks I know too much." The conversation took a darker turn as Marilyn described feeling increasingly threatened by those in the Kennedy inner circle who saw her as a liability. She had been told in no uncertain terms that her relationship with the president needed to end completely, and that her silence about certain matters was non-negotiable. "They've made it clear that I need to disappear from Jack's life completely," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm afraid that disappearing might mean more than just staying away from him."
Alain was stunned by the implications of what she was telling him. This wasn't the fantasy world of Hollywood romance that the public imagined. This was something far more sinister. A situation where one of the world's most famous women was genuinely afraid for her safety because of her involvement with the most powerful man in America. As the night grew later, Marilyn seemed to become both more relaxed and more agitated. The alcohol and pills she had been taking throughout the evening were beginning to take effect, but her mind remained sharp and her fears remained real. "I need to tell someone," she said suddenly, gripping Elaine's hand. "If something happens to me, I need someone to know the truth." What she told him next would change everything Alain thought he knew about power, politics, and the price of fame. Marilyn revealed that she had been keeping detailed records of her conversations with both John and Robert Kennedy, including discussions about matters of national security that she had overheard during their private meetings. "I wrote it all down," she said. "Names, dates, conversations about Cuba, about the Russians, about things the public will never know. I thought it would protect me. If they knew I had evidence, they wouldn't dare hurt me. But now I think it just makes me more dangerous to them." The revelation that Marilyn had been essentially gathering intelligence, whether intentionally or not, on some of the most sensitive political matters of the day, painted her death in an entirely different light. She wasn't just a troubled actress who had become inconvenient. She was potentially a national security threat in the eyes of those whose job it was to protect the presidency. "Where are these records?" Alain asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "Safe," she replied cryptically. "But if something happens to me, promise me you'll tell someone. Promise me you'll let people know that I wasn't just some crazy woman who couldn't handle the pressure. There are people who wanted me dead, and they had reasons that had nothing to do with love or jealousy." Alain promised, though he hoped desperately that he would never need to fulfill that promise. As the evening drew to a close, around 3 a.m. on August 5th, Marilyn's driver arrived to take her home. She seemed reluctant to leave, as if she sensed that this might be her last chance for honest human connection. "Thank you," she told Alain as they said goodbye, "for seeing me as a person instead of a symbol, for listening to me instead of just wanting something from me. I wish we had met sooner." Their final embrace was tender and desperate. Marilyn whispered something in his ear that he would remember for the rest of his life. "If they win, don't let them make me into just another tragic Hollywood story. Remember that I tried to be brave." Alain watched her car disappear into the early morning darkness, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread. Something about her demeanor in those final moments had felt like a goodbye, not just to him, but to life itself. 12 hours later, Alain was awakened by a phone call from Arthur Krim. Marilyn Monroe had been found dead in her Brentwood home, apparently from an overdose of barbiturates. The official ruling would be probable suicide, but for Alain, who had spent her final conscious hours with her, the explanation felt incomplete and troubling. The woman he had talked with the night before had been troubled, yes, but she had also been making plans for the future. She had spoken about films she wanted to make, places she wanted to travel, and her hopes for finding genuine love. This was not the mindset of someone planning to end her life within hours. More importantly, her fears about powerful enemies who wanted her silenced added a sinister dimension to her death that the official investigation never seriously considered.
The fact that potential evidence of her political knowledge disappeared after her death only reinforced Elaine's suspicions that something far more complex had occurred. For 62 years, Alain kept Marilyn's secret. He never spoke publicly about their final evening together, never revealed the political implications of what she had told him, and never challenged the official narrative of her death. But privately, he carried the burden of knowing that one of history's most famous deaths might not have been what it seemed. The secret weighed heavily on him throughout his life. Every time he saw Marilyn's image in a film or magazine, every time her death was discussed as a cautionary tale about the pressures of fame, he remembered her final words and her plea that he not let them reduce her to just another tragic Hollywood story. It wasn't until his own final weeks, as he prepared for death in the summer of 2024, that Alain finally decided to reveal the truth. In a private conversation with his longtime friend and biographer, he shared the details of that August night and the fears that Marilyn had expressed about her safety. "I have carried her secret for my entire adult life," he said weakly from his hospital bed, "but I cannot take it to my grave. She asked me to tell someone the truth if something happened to her. I failed her for 62 years. I will not fail her anymore." The revelation of Elaine's account adds crucial context to the ongoing debates about Marilyn's death. While it may never be possible to prove definitively what happened in her Brentwood home on August 5, 1962, his testimony provides evidence that her fears about powerful enemies were real and that her death occurred at a time when she posed a genuine threat to some of the most important people in America. The political implications of Marilyn's revelations were staggering when viewed in the context of the times. In 1962, the Cold War was at its height. The Bay of Pigs invasion had occurred just a year earlier, and the Cuban Missile Crisis was only months away. Any breach of national security information, particularly involving America's most famous actress, would have been considered a catastrophic threat to both the Kennedy administration and national security. The records that Marilyn claimed to have kept would have been incredibly valuable to foreign intelligence services, particularly those of the Soviet Union and Cuba. The possibility that such sensitive information could become public, either through Marilyn's own actions or through coercion by hostile forces, would have made her elimination a matter of national security in the eyes of those charged with protecting presidential secrets. Moreover, the personal scandal of the president's affair with America's most famous actress was already becoming difficult to contain. Robert Kennedy's role as Attorney General made the situation even more complex, as he was simultaneously responsible for enforcing the law while protecting his brother's political future. The pressure to resolve the Marilyn problem permanently would have been enormous. Elaine's account also sheds new light on the timeline of Marilyn's final day. According to his testimony, she was lucid, engaged, and making future plans as late as 3 a.m. on August 5th, just 12 hours before her body was discovered. This contradicts the official timeline, which suggested that she had been in declining mental health for days or weeks before her death.
The inconsistencies in the official investigation have long troubled researchers and conspiracy theorists. The delay in calling police, the cleaning of Marilyn's house before investigators arrived, and the mysterious disappearance of potential evidence all take on new significance when viewed through the lens of Elaine's revelations about the political sensitivity of Marilyn's situation. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who performed Marilyn's autopsy, noted several inconsistencies with a typical barbiturate suicide, including the absence of pill residue in her stomach and the high concentration of drugs in her blood. These findings are more consistent with an injection or other non-oral method of administration, which would be unusual for someone attempting suicide but consistent with homicide. The role of Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, and her personal physician, Dr. Hyman Engelberg, has also been questioned.
Both men had connections to left-wing political causes that made them potentially vulnerable to pressure from government authorities concerned about national security. Their behavior on the night of Marilyn's death, including the delay in calling police and their subsequent statements about her mental state, takes on new significance when viewed as potentially coercive rather than protective. Perhaps most importantly, Elaine's account honors Marilyn's final request that she not be remembered simply as a tragic figure who couldn't cope with fame, but as a woman who found herself in an impossible situation involving the highest levels of American power and who tried, in her own way, to protect herself and preserve the truth. The woman Alain Delon spent those final hours with was not just the vulnerable, troubled actress that history remembers. She was also a person who understood the dangerous game she had become involved in, and who was trying, perhaps too late, to find a way to survive it. Her attempts to protect herself through documentation of her knowledge may have been naive, but they demonstrated a clear understanding that her life was in danger. The broader implications of Elaine's revelations extend beyond the specifics of Marilyn's death to questions about the relationship between power, celebrity, and national security in American society. The idea that the government might eliminate a private citizen, even one as famous as Marilyn Monroe, to protect state secrets challenges fundamental assumptions about democracy and the rule of law. However, the context of the Cold War era, when national survival seemed to hang in the balance, provides some understanding of why such extreme measures might have been considered necessary by those in power. The assassination of President Kennedy just over a year later would demonstrate that even the highest levels of American government were not immune to violent solutions to political problems. Today, more than 60 years after that tragic night, questions about Marilyn Monroe's death continue to fascinate the public. New evidence, witness accounts, and investigative techniques have shed additional light on the circumstances surrounding her final hours. But Alain Delon's testimony may be the most important piece of the puzzle, an eyewitness account from someone who spoke with her extensively during her final night and who heard her own assessment of the threats she faced. If this incredible revelation about one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who's interested in the truth behind famous deaths. And tell us in the comments, do you think we'll ever know the complete truth about what happened to Marilyn Monroe? Because sometimes the most important secrets are kept for decades before they finally see the light.